Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in. Thank you for coming to the housewarming. That was fun.
Yeah. Nice house.
Yes, thank you. Shall we get into an exciting mailbag episode?
Let's do it.
So, my friend Phil starts out with a question. It seems like the topic of economic development of poor countries is less in vogue than it was a decade or two ago. Is this true in economist circles? Is that topic under or overrated in your view?
It's underrated. Yes. I don't know if development economics is less popular within economics. I think that, the kind of research people are doing is a little bit disconnected from the public conversation. But I think that, overall, the idea that we're going to invest a whole bunch of money in poor countries and that this is going to make us rich has gotten less popular recently, primarily because of the capital leaving China. And that's actually, honestly, I think that that's a mistake. I think that actually capital is going to pour into countries in South and Southeast Asia. And I've written about that. Yeah, South and Southeast Asia are going to be, that's where the action is going to be. India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, which people are sleeping on, and and then to some degree Thailand, I guess, although it's already a little bit rich, and to some degree Malaysia, although it's already a little bit rich, and then Bangladesh is going to be a big one. Anyway, so I think that is going to be a big theme. There's going to be a lot of this capital getting plowed in, not just Western capital, but Chinese capital too. I think that the Chinese companies are going to go there too, and this is going to, there's going to be Chinese companies and Korean, German companies, whatever, making stuff side by side in Vietnam. And I think that, and side by side even in India. And so this is a really important big story. If you look at the populations of those countries, the South and Southeast Asian countries, it's much combined. It's much bigger than China. I mean, India alone is bigger than China now. And then once you throw in all of the other South Asian countries in Southeast Asia, it's much bigger than China. And so the opportunity to pull all those people out of poverty is huge. One thing is that a lot of the people you saw talking about developing country industrialization were sort of heterodox thinkers or progressives or people like that who are now, a lot of those people have become very pessimistic on any country that's not China being able to develop. So you've seen guys like Danny Roderick, turn around and say, okay, well, of course China could develop, and nobody else can. The manufacturing window is closed. You see Joe Stiglitz saying, I think they're full of shit. I think that's wrong, and we're going to see that be wrong. But we'll see. We will see. And so, yeah, so I think that there are huge opportunities for developing country industrialization, and a lot of interesting countries here. How is Indonesia going to develop, Bangladesh and the Philippines, and questions of policy are really important here. And yet people aren't paying enough attention. They should be paying more attention to this.
Related, he has a follow-up where he basically asks, he says, are there reasons aside from humanitarian ones to care about the economic development of X country in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia, just to name a couple of examples?
Well, I mean, it'll make you money. Poor countries have much more room to grow. So you invest there, and then you make money. And that's why that's why developed countries invest, and now China, which now includes China, that's why they invest in those countries. They don't invest there for humanitarian it's not aid, right? They're trying to make some money. And so it matters for money. It matters for, human rights. I mean, humanitarian stuff. It matters for geopolitics, because the rise of the economies of India and Indonesia and these countries are going to make them more powerful, right? China's a superpower now because of its economic growth. India is kind of a superpower in waiting, right? They're the biggest country in the world now. They are the biggest country that has ever existed, actually. And they are, in terms of population, obviously. And they are, they're growing fast, and they have pockets of very advanced technology that I see will only grow, and their education's improving. And so I think that India is going to be a very powerful country. It's going to be a more powerful country than it is now. And Indonesia is going to be a more powerful country than it is now. And it remains to be seen what they're going to do with that power, right? And smaller countries like Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand, these countries, and Bangladesh, they won't become superpowers, at all. They won't become great powers because they're too small, but they will get an increased ability to defend themselves if anyone decides to, come try to beat them up. like South Korea being a model there, right? Like South Korea is never going to be a great power because it's small, but it has really increased its ability to defend itself. So I think that geopolitics, humanitarian reasons, and then just like ability to make money, right? You invest in these places, you make some money.
Related, I'd be curious to get his reflections on the Jeffrey Sachs versus William Easterly debates of the early 2000s. Who was right with the benefit of hindsight?
Well, so one thing about Jeffrey Sachs is that he's almost always wrong about everything. He seeks out wrong positions, adheres to them, and then flies around, jet setting around, trying to peddle influence and be a famous, important guy. And he's just full of crap consistently. So don't listen to anything Jeffrey Sachs says. That said, the big debate for those who between him and Easterly, for those who are not familiar with this, is that Easterly basically said foreign aid is bad, it makes countries dependent, and Sachs said aid is good, it can make countries rich. Well, it turns out neither one of them was quite right. I mean, Easterly can be right. Like sometimes this does happen, but usually what we just see is that aid has like a minor effect on relieving poverty, but it doesn't make a country develop. Aid is basically like UBI for countries, right? It's you get some free money. It doesn't necessarily boost you. Maybe for a few countries, it does, but I think usually it doesn't really boost you to industrialized status. It doesn't make you rich. It's more like the give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day kind of thing. Well, foreign aid is like giving a man a fish. It's like, yeah, well, but he ate for a day. He had a fish. So it's not. I think Easterly exaggerated the negatives of aid, and then I think Sachs exaggerated the potential of foreign aid to be positive. So I think that in that sense, aid is fine and good, and it turns out that remittances are actually a lot more important than foreign aid quantitatively in terms of how much money actually gets sent. People, Philippine nurses or housekeepers going and working overseas and sending a bunch of money back, right, to the Philippines. That turns out to be quantitatively more important than foreign aid. There have been some toxic relationships with foreign aid where countries gave foreign aid in order to secure access to the resources of poor countries, preferential access to the resources, which that was a bit of a selfish and cynical move that often that aid ended up making its way into the pockets of corrupt elites in those countries, as Easterly pointed out. But I think that a lot of aid is just done through official organizations that don't they don't have that cynical motive, and they try real hard to get the aid to like poor people in villages and make it do healthcare and education. They do a good job. They do a fine job, but aid is not going to substitute for industrialization. It's not going to make countries rich.
Yeah, I actually want to segue to your UBI post because we have a great question from Jesse, who asks, should we pay people to be mothers, or what is the best way to elevate the status of motherhood?
Well, why not? Why just mothers? Why not fathers too? Like I understand that people think that like mothers have some special connection to babies that fathers lack, and that's a common idea that goes around, but like that's not universally true. Should we pay people to do childcare at home? We absolutely should. Of course we should. That is uncompensated work. There's no one compensating people, and yet this work is extremely valuable. Like it's people are doing it for altruistic reasons. You're doing it because you want to have kids and take care of a kid. You're giving up so many hours of your life and so much money of your wealth. You're just giving up so much to take care of these kids, and no one's paying you. And so that is work that is valuable to society. It's valuable to those kids personally, but it's also valuable to society because then it sustains society. I absolutely think people should be paid to take care of kids. I think that is a really good thing to do. Now trying getting that past Congress. I mean, but if you think about it, the child tax credit is that, right? Like, it's obviously not contingent on staying at home and taking care of the kids. It's not dependent on how many hours of parental labor you put in, but it's a way of paying people who have kids, right? That's what the child tax credit is. And Mitt Romney supported a child tax credit. Biden did an expanded child tax credit and tried to extend it, but then people just said no. So that is it's not exactly the same as paying something, but how are you going to verify how many hours people really spent parenting at home versus how many hours they spent watching Netflix, right? You can't. So you can monitor people at work and say, okay, did you turn in this work? But you can't monitor people at home and say, did you actually spend time teaching your kid to read instead of watching Netflix? You can't do that. So you can't really look at the hours of effort people put in as parents. What you can do is pay people who actually have kids. You can do a child tax credit. So that's what that was. And then we canceled it. So maybe we should bring it back.
And so it's basically fair to say your UBI piece, you found out, or we found out, that there was no obvious evidence that people spent more time on activities that UBI should be encouraging, like spending more time with their kids or making poetry or whatever people would be doing.
That's right. This was a very good study. They had these surveys where you fill out like, what are you doing now on your cell phone? As you over the course of years, that you got this UBI, you'd be like, oh, how many hours do you spend on this? And so you do that. But what they found was that people who worked less, what they mostly substituted it with was leisure. They didn't do a lot of extra, like they didn't go back to school much. They didn't, spend extra time. They didn't say they spent extra time taking care of the kids or with friends. But remember, these are surveys, right? People might not remember exactly how many hours they do of stuff. They might have actually been spending more time on the useful stuff without realizing it, for the survey. So it's hard to tell, but I think that it's a more disappointing result than previous results had been, because previous results had shown that people spend more time with their kids, people spend more time going back to school, people work hard to get better jobs when you give them UBI. Very, very encouraging results. And this is just discouraging compared to all the earlier encouraging results. But it's not the final word. And, it's not, I wouldn't say it's the definitive proof here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to get to a question about something you wrote about on the software increases inequality thesis. This is from Ray, he mentions an old Paul Graham essay that came out, basically arguing that we should be in favor of inequality to the extent that software companies' rise are equated with inequality. That is, when software companies get more successful, there's going to be more inequality. And so we have to accept that the more economic growth leads to more inequality in this way. Is that the wrong way of thinking about it?
Well, so the answer is we don't know. Like, some people blame technology for the run up in inequality that we saw in the 80s and then again in the 2000s. Some people blame the weakness of unions. Some people blame the tax structure. Some people blame outsourcing, offshoring, and some people blame technology. And so the question is, like, how did technology do this? There's a new paper out that says that while investment in hardware reduces inequality, investment in software tends to increase inequality at the company level. And so that's, I'm not talking about inequality. I'm sorry. I should be more precise. I'm talking about the capital share of income. So basically, companies that, like, software replaces workers and machinery complements workers. Now, it's notable that that's exactly opposite to the findings of Acemoglu and Restrepo in 2018. So Darren Acemoglu, one of the main opponents of tech because he thinks it's going to take everyone's job, this famous economist from MIT, he wrote this paper with Pasquale Restrepo, who's a guy that I know, who's a very smart guy. They wrote a paper in 2018 where they went around and looked at companies and they said, all right, so which of these companies replace workers and which of these companies add workers? And they found that robots, specifically industrial robots, lead to the replacement of human workers, while IT investment in general, which is going to be software, that led to increases in workers at companies and more, higher wages and things like that, good things that we want. So basically, the idea there was robots bad, software good. Now we get this new paper that says, robots good, software bad. I don't know which of these to believe. And, since Acemoglu and Restrepo came out with that paper, a lot of other papers came out looking at robots specifically and saying robots good. But this is the first paper I've seen that says software bad, that also contradicts Acemoglu and Restrepo. So you have to understand, there's a lot of these studies, they have somewhat different methodologies and data sets, and they have, sometimes there's theoretical assumptions embedded in the estimation procedures they use, and those theoretical assumptions can be bad. And so I think that we don't really know yet, but it's worth looking into the idea that software adoption increases capital's share of income and decreases labor's share of income, that software replaces people while hardware augments people. I don't know why that should be true. I have a suspicion. And my suspicion is based on, this is just a suspicion. This is me making shit up. I said this to David Otter once, and he liked it. Another MIT economist who I think is really careful about a lot of it. My suspicion is that what software allowed a lot of companies to do is increase their sales reach. In the 90s and the 2000s, you could sell stuff over the internet very easily, and you didn't need a lot more people to do it, right? You could just have a website, and the website would sell for you. And so you'd have fewer salespeople, fewer marketing people. Back in the days, back in the 80s, how did you sell people? Obviously, you had advertising, but then like you needed like these armies of salesmen. You've seen Death of a Salesman, right? The play. You had all these people just going around saying, "Hey, you want to buy a washing machine? Hey, you want to buy this? You want to buy that?" And now you don't really have that anymore. Like, when's the last time you got a door-to-door salesperson come to your house? It doesn't happen. When I was a kid in the 90s, it would occasionally happen. Encyclopedia salespeople, insurance salespeople, vacuum salespeople, people who go door to door. The door to door salesman's dead. I've never seen a door to door salesman in the last 20 years. Have you? Like, it's dead. And so I think that my guess is that increasing sales reach it looks like capital intensivity on paper, and it is capital intensivity because we're thinking about we're so trained to think about machines replacing humans in production that I think we don't necessarily think about machines replacing humans in sales. But I think there's a lot of this going on, and I think that should be followed up on, because I think sales, as anyone who's run a company like you must know, sales is incredibly labor intensive, right? You've got, if you're a SaaS startup, you're sitting there with an army of guys calling people being like, hey, you want to buy some SaaS, right? And that's B2B sales, still fairly labor intensive. I mean, people can find your website, right? Some people are going to find your website. Some people are going to find your product on, I don't know, like, or wherever we find a B2B SaaS provider, right? Like, where do you find that stuff actually, besides just having a salesman call you up? Like,
Where do you find which B2B SaaS provider to use?
yeah, where do you find, like, suppose I want a company to like help me with payroll, like, a SaaS company to help me do my payroll. Where do I find that?
There are some products like Vendor, or there's sort of like G2. They're sort of like SaaS review sites, but they don't. They're too. It's almost like going to Yelp to find a restaurant. Like, there's too many reviews. You don't know sort of the source of those reviews. What people usually do is they just ask other founders, what do they use? And I know this because I've been working on a social network for founders, and the biggest question is people just asking what do you use for payroll? What do is Warp good? Is Rippling good? Et cetera.
And the fact that, like, I feel like the B2B stuff is higher touch than B2C, right? Like, you look at Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, he's trying to be a high touch consumer product salesman, right? He's trying to go to you and say, here, buy this. I forget what he even sells. What does he sell?
Willie Loman? I don't.
But he's selling products like, yeah, he's trying to be high touch with this stuff. And it turns out that you can actually just be low touch. You can actually just say, just throw up some web ads that, here's our vacuum cleaner, buy our vacuum cleaner. You don't need to send a guy to show you how well it vacuums your house, right? It's funny. I know you love funny stories. So there was this guy I met in Japan at a dinner party, and he was the master water filter salesman. Or not water filter, it was like a water cooler, like, one of those like home water coolers. But he was also a master pickup artist.
Wow.
So he was such a good salesman that he would go door to door. And of course, all the people who'd be home were women, because that was before Japanese women went en masse into the workforce, right? So women were at home while men were at work, and he'd sleep with your wife, and he'd sleep with your daughter, he'd sleep with your family. He would do this while selling, and also sell you a whole bunch of a water cooler at the same time. You'd buy the water cooler, and you get him as sort of this, thing in the bargain. And he was just like legendary as like the guy who got all the chicks by just being such a good salesman. And I don't know, he was a very quiet, unassuming guy. So when you have all these incels imagining like who's the Chad, they imagine this like, this like movie star looking, like, Chris Hemsworth looking guy, right? The Chad. Like, no, it's this like quiet, bespectacled water filter salesman in Japan who's just really, really good at talking to like, bored housewives and college students who are like sitting around at home. Like, that's who the Chad is. I met him. Like, and it was ridiculous. He made so much money that he just retired after. So he did this for like 3 years, and then I think he just like took like many years off and just like sat around, like basically do nothing except calling up all the women who are now in his phone. I don't know what that's what some guy said. I don't know, but this is the legend of the sexy water filter salesman.
Well, we need to, study him. We need to outsource his
We have a task force. Yeah, like we need to automate him. We need him as the next GPT. I don't know. Anyway, so then yeah, no. So I think that software may be replacing high touch consumer salespeople, and that was a lot of the sort of capital intensivity that we saw was like you buy software and now you can sell more easily. But I think that there's some production stuff too. Like there probably were to some degree too many paper pushers, like just doing internal stuff at the company, like too many people filling out forms, and now you can let go a few of those people because you can have one person do it in Excel when it would take two people doing it on paper before. I think Otter has cataloged stuff like that. He's talked about taking a close look at routine manual jobs versus routine cognitive jobs. So the paper pushers are the routine cognitive jobs, and he's shown that a lot of that has decreased. And so I think that if you're looking for what jobs are actually getting replaced, we may be thinking about the wrong things. We're always thinking about like the blue collar guy who's now automated because a machine's doing his job, right? I think there's a lot less of that than people think. And maybe there's more just like, traditional office work that we just need a few less of those people because now we have software. So I think that's where that paper is kind of pointing us, but I think it needs a lot more investigation. We need to follow up on it.
Right. But I remember a conversation with Nate Lebenz where you were pretty bullish. You brought up the Mark Andreessen typing sort of typist example as like in terms of comparative advantage example as to you were bullish on this idea that we'd have more employment thanks to AI in white collar stuff. And then I think Nate's question back was, yeah, more employment, but at what wage level, right? If AI can do a lot of things better than humans can.
Well, okay, but I think that in terms of so my thesis was about complementarity, and I'm saying that a person using AI will be more powerful than a person just sitting there on their own. And then that the more you can do, the more like basically wages are just demand over supply, right? Just like any price. So if you can do more, that means demand for your stuff will go up, right? Like if you can now do the work of like 2 employees before, demand for your stuff then goes up. But because you're great, like, wow, I want that, right? That's why productivity raises wages, right? Productivity, but then if software replaces people, that's more like an increase in supply, so that reduces wages. So the more you just have someone pressing a button and then AI does a thing for you, then that could reduce wages. While if you have people having to exert their effort making the AI do a thing, that's complementarity, right? Think about the difference between a person like, like what's a good example of like real true automation? I guess ATMs, right? It's just you press buttons and the consumer presses buttons and things happen, or like self-checkout machines. All right, so that's automation, except it's not 100% automation because you actually need the consumer to do a lot of the labor unpaid now. Like you're standing there pressing buttons at the ATM instead of someone else doing it for you at the bank window. You're standing there, scanning your own things instead of having a human scan it. Is self-checkout really automation? It's not. It's just it's a stealth price increase actually, because it means that now part of the price is the time you have to spend fucking sitting there checking out your shit because someone's still swiping everything. There's no machine that does a thing that wasn't. So actually that's kind of a bullshit fake automation. But ATMs are real automation. And so think about that versus like a drill press, right? A drill press is like a machine. You've got to figure out how to use it. You've got how you take the metal over and you drill the thing. And then that's complementary, right? Your labor is still being fully utilized. You're just able to do more than before. So a machinist operating a drill press will make a lot more than a blacksmith who would do that by hand in the old days, right? But then with ATMs, someone who just does the work of what an ATM will do would make less because it would compete with you. It would substitute for you instead of complement. So it's all just back to this idea of substituting in labor in production processes versus complementing. Can it replace you, or does it make you do a different thing than you used to do? And if the latter, then wages will probably go up. If the former, then wages will probably go down. Notice, however, that bank tellers Actually, the number of bank tellers has held steady since ATMs were introduced, and they just do different things. They found different things for the bank tellers to do. But and wages went up in that because bank tellers now have to do more complex stuff. Instead of simply doing the rote work of like, here's your money, I'm taking your slip, here's your cash. Like, they're not doing that as much anymore. Now they're, more like financial advisors. They're more like explaining what you can do with your bank account, helping you with your troubles, helping you troubleshoot, helping you move money from this to that, helping use the online thing. Like, basically they've become more service, like hands-on, like service employees who show you how to do stuff and help you with your troubles. That has made them more valuable. It's also required them to be educated. Like, you could be just someone who went to high school and be a bank teller in the 60s, right? Because all you have to do is simple arithmetic and read some stuff.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Fast forward to the end of 2024. Think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If learning a new language is on your list, you absolutely need to check out Babbel. Babbel offers a range of learning tools, self-study app lessons, live classes, and even podcasts, which have always been my favorite way to learn. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel isn't just a game to kill time and make you feel like you're learning a language. It's not overly academic or rigid either. It's all about learning language for the real world. Babbel stands out because it's designed by real people using a modern conversational teaching approach. It's not always easy, nothing worth doing ever is, but it's straightforward and designed to help you start speaking in just 3 weeks. With Babbel, I was able to brush up on my intermediate Spanish to ramp up for travel to Argentina last year, and was able to set clear goals based on how much time each week I wanted to practice. Join millions of Babbel language learners across all age groups. Here's a special limited time offer for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/econ102. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/econ102, spelled BABBEL.com/econ102. Rules and restrictions may apply. This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a B2B SaaS app, at some point your customers will start asking for enterprise features like SAML authentication, SCIM provisioning, role-based access control, and audit trails. That's where WorkOS comes in, with easy-to-use and flexible APIs that help you ship enterprise features on day one without slowing down your core product development. Today, some of the hottest startups in the world are already powered by WorkOS, including ones you probably know, like Perplexity, Vercel, Jasper, and Webflow. WorkOS also provides a generous free tier of up to 1 million monthly active users for user management, making it the perfect authentication and authorization solution for growing companies. It comes standard with rich features like bot protection, MFA, roles and permissions, and more. If you are currently looking to build SSO for your first enterprise customer, you should consider using WorkOS. Integrate in minutes and start shipping enterprise plans today. What's the equivalent version with AI that you could imagine, like that same step up of like, okay, we went from sort of bank tellers to financial advisors. Now with AI, like, what's the equivalent of like, okay, we'll go from financial advisors to like, what are things that people do that AI can't do?
Well, for AI, I think that AI with bank tellers will be, having AI do the work of what bank tellers do now will be pretty difficult because they do a bunch of different things and it's pretty irregular. It'll be like it'll be hard to train them. Obviously there'll be helplines where you can ask GPT type computer, like, help me with my bank account. How do I do this? They already have that. I mean, that exists now at banks. What you go into the bank for, a lot of it is boomer shit. It's like, how do I open PDF? And so like AI can do that if you're a person who is good at, it can replace a human at that if what you're good at, if you're a person who's good at like asking AI a whole bunch of prompts and then extracting information from the prompts. But if you were that good at prompting AI and reading the information from AI prompts, why didn't you just figure out how to use the fucking bank website? So the human, I think the multifaceted human touch of the bank teller is underrated. The bank teller will show you, you'll point to something on a piece of paper, right? With AI, you could do that, right? You could feed your piece of paper into a computer vision thing, and then it could pop up a little image where it points a little arrow at the thing, right? But I think that people feel, naturally comfortable when a bank teller comes, oh, here's the thing that you need to do, putting in different words and stuff like that. And of course, people are not going to hallucinate. They occasionally will. Like occasionally a bank teller won't know what the fuck is going on. Will give you a line of bullshit. But they're better. Like AI will just the hallucination problem's still so bad. No one's ever fixed it. The other day I couldn't remember this guy's name from a book, and so I was like, okay, well maybe I'll ask GPT, right? 4.0 or whatever. So I asked GPT. I was like, okay, who's the guy in the book Wireless Wars who was working for the British government, and then he was saying Huawei is really dangerous, and then Huawei basically paid this guy to work for them, and then he started saying like, oh, Huawei's totally safe, and it's an example of how Huawei buys out their opposition, right? I was saying they're going to do this to Donald Trump too, but I couldn't remember that guy's name. I think it was John Suffolk was the guy's name. But then I asked GPT, and it said, oh, actually this is that guy, and it told me the name of the wrong guy. It told me the name of a guy who just works for Britain and is still skeptical of Huawei. It just said, oh yeah, that guy sold out to Huawei and now just goes around shilling for Huawei. No, he doesn't. He's never been employed by Huawei. He's like a stand-up guy. And so had I just taken that and not hunted that down myself, and so I did. I was like, oh, you lied, you computer bitch. And so then it that would have been libelous. Like literally libelous had I written that, not just under British libel law, but under American too, like just claiming complete lies. And my blog would have just taken a huge reputational hit had I just pasted that in. Or I just said, oh, look at this guy. I just named him in passing, right? Without any link or something. But I was like, no, I know you lie sometimes, so I'm going to look it up. I was like, complete lie. It's like, okay, AI, now I want you to list a huge list of like 10 other guys that fit this description. It listed me like a huge list of people. Only one of the guys was the right guy. And I looked each one up, and he was the second guy on the new list. All the other people it didn't apply to, and was just totally like making up shit about all these other people, saying that they went to work for Huawei, and like one of them did. Well, no, one of the guys was a guy who like always worked for Huawei from day one. But like, anyway, just total bullshit. Like, maybe that'll be fixed. Maybe all you have to do is scale and that goes away. But like, that's what everybody at OpenAI tells me. Just scale, and the hallucination problem goes away as you scale, right? Bigger model will fix hallucinations. It won't lie anymore. Well, yes, it will, because it lies more now than it used to. Like GPT 4.0, I even stopped using it for proofreading because it would like give me a list of 20 fake errors and then miss the one real error. Like, it was so bad. It was ridiculously bad. It got worse over time. It used to give me like, the one real error and then like 3 fake errors in a small list. And now it gives me like 20 fake errors. Like, the hallucinations have just gotten out of fucking control. Like, what are you guys doing? I don't know that they are doing anything, but like something's going on. And maybe it's the dog fooding problem. Maybe it's eating synthetic data and getting worse, because like there's some papers showing that makes it much worse. I don't know. Technically, I don't understand what makes these things worse. I don't know who understands. Like, I could go ask Rune or something. I don't know. Like, I don't even know that he knows. Like, I talked to one OpenAI guy when I talked about the proofreading thing. I talked to an OpenAI guy about it. He's like, we're really trying to fix this. And then I was like, thanks. And then like, I don't know. I don't think they managed to fix it yet, because so it's basically dead for proofreading. And so anyway, if AI were the thing we sort of think it should be, where it just answers questions correctly and is like, then I think GPT is an AGI. I just think it's a dumbass AGI that talks a lot of shit. Like, I know a lot of dumbass AGIs who talk a lot of shit. They're called junior high kids, right? A junior high kid is an AGI. Or not AGI, they're an NGI, I guess, natural general intelligence. A junior high kid is a general intelligence, but a junior high kid talks a lot of shit, and AI does too. And talking a lot of shit does not preclude you from being generally intelligent. So anyway, I don't know it's very hard to imagine what things will and won't be useful for, right? Like, it's very good at, GPT type AI is very good at sounding like a person, and like a lot of people want their hands held. So like online customer service, where you just talk to some like guy in the Philippines or India or wherever they hire people. who walks you through like, here's the basic things to try, and is basically a walking FAQ. AI does great at that. It has a better bedside manner than humans. Like, so for customer service, even actual bedside manner of doctors whose main job is to just hold your hand and tell you that like, yes, you're going to die from cancer, but no, I'm kidding. It's like, but just whatever, holding your hand, like, no, you don't have ALS. You are just dehydrated. AI is good at that. AI will be amazing at talking to hypochondriacs. Like people who just sit there looking at MedHelp all day thinking like, oh no, do I have Guillain-Barré syndrome? I could have that. What if I have fatal insomnia? And like, AI is going to be great at reassuring those people until some hypochondriac figures out a jailbreak and get it, tell them that he has a rare disease. Then you're fucked. But AI is going to be really good at like holding people's hands and stuff like that, I think. Because it's full of shit, but it's got a great manner.
Yeah, good to know. I want to segue to another listener question. This one's from Rebecca. Shout out to our female listeners. Please keep sending more questions. Rebecca asks, no, and last week we talked about how Kamala's biggest blemish was immigration. Can you talk more about the negative impacts illegal immigration has had, or what's the right way of thinking about what are the true costs?
In terms of illegal immigration, well, I think that the main cost is psychological, making people feel like they're out of control of who gets into their country. And it's not, it's like, that's what makes people feel like it's an invasion. The true cost is psychic. Most of the people who are really upset about this never see an illegal immigrant, and they never pay for an illegal immigrant. They're just far removed from illegal immigrants, right? The people who see illegal immigrants, like, there was an illegal immigrant who would like fix my appliances around my house. He was a brilliant guy. He was, from Mexico. He was here illegally for many years. Great dude, love him. And like, I'm sure that when I would walk through, Dolores Park and, and see some guys standing around, I'm sure that some of those guys are illegal immigrants, just like working class dudes standing around shooting the shit, maybe listen to a little music. Yeah, it was the least menacing thing I've ever seen. And almost nobody's like directly harmed by an illegal immigrant. You're like, oh, crime. I mean, illegal immigrants commit less crime than Americans on average. They commit more crime than legal immigrants on average, but less crime than the average, native-born American. So like, it's not like, oh, I walked through a neighborhood with the illegal immigrants and I almost got killed by the MS-13. No. Like, I walked through a neighborhood filled with illegal immigrants and I bought a burrito and now I have a burrito and that's cool. And now I can buy some like, off-label cheap suitcase in like a little store or like a stuffed animal for my kid. And like, that's what I did in the neighborhood full of illegal immigrants. Like, that's your experience. Like, your experience, the actual lived experience of illegal immigrants is, lawn care, tacos. I mean, obviously this was in the age when most illegal immigrants were from Mexico, or, there's also like high skilled illegal immigrants who like fly here and overstay a visa, like those people are like, that's your waitress at the Burmese restaurant, right? Who's overqualified to be a waitress. She probably should be like a health tech or something like that, but she can't because she's an illegal immigrant because she flew here and overstayed her visa and crashed with some family and friends. Like, that's your other experience of an illegal immigrant, right? Your experience of illegal immigrants is overwhelmingly positive in person. You're not going to get like robbed and raped and stuff. Like, obviously, once in a while, we're a country of 330 million people. We've got 20 million illegal immigrants or something like that. Once in a while, an illegal immigrant is going to do a bad thing, is going to do a horrible thing. And then all the right wingers grab it and like, what about this person? Say the name of this victim, as if you could have, like, you won't even reduce murder by getting rid of illegal immigrants. Like, you'll increase murder rates by getting rid of illegal immigrants. And, people who are murderers are then going to, anyway. The point is that they always pick that one case and they're like screaming all over social media.
So there's no economic impact that's worth.
Well, there are. So in terms of wages, like, as far as we can tell, illegal immigration doesn't outcompete people's wages, take people's jobs, any of that stuff. There is one big negative economic impact from illegal immigration, which is that It strains the local budgets of governments who have to take care of them and their kids. So when you had all the asylum seekers, the new illegal immigration, right? All the illegal immigration stereotypes that I was describing before are like 20 years ago. These are 20 years ago, just like single Mexican guys who would sneak across the border and work in America, or like fly here from Asia and overstay their visas or something. Like that's now we're talking about asylum seekers who it's not even clear if they are illegal immigrants because our silly asylum law makes them legal immigrants as soon as they turn themselves into the border patrol. They're illegal for a short period of time because of our stupid law. Anyway, the people view them as illegal. People think of them as illegal because they came illegally across the border. They snuck in. They were illegal for a while, at least. And those people, they're pretty poor. They need, they because they are visible, because they're here in the country legally after they turn themselves in and get and they're waiting for their asylum hearing and they get quote unquote parole, right? They're here legally at that point, waiting for their asylum hearing. And because of that, they don't have to hide. And because of that, they're going to go claim city services. They're going to say, house me, feed me, city of New York. Why New York? Because Texas, the governor of Texas, or I forget if he was the one who sent them to New York specifically, probably. But one of the red state governors sent a whole bunch of migrants to New York. And then New York was like, we are a generous, wealthy, blue city, and we will house the migrants. And they housed like 100 migrants. They're like, look how great we are. And then 10,000 migrants came. And then 20,000. And it's like, oh shit, we don't have anywhere to put them. So we're going to put them in the gym of your school. And you're going to go do school from Zoom at home. And at this point, people just start getting fucking mad. So everybody got really mad. That's the actual cost is the euphemism, the econ terminology for that is called fiscal costs, fiscal strain on local budgets. Because Bill Clinton signed into law in 1996 that says that if you are an illegal immigrant, you get nothing from the federal government. And this applies to asylum seekers too, actually. Like you get nothing. You don't get any welfare from the federal government. It's nada. But that doesn't say anything about state and local governments because we have federalism in America. And so the city of San Francisco is still going to pay, its army of useless nonprofit people to pretend that they're giving you services. And the city of New York is still actually going to give you services and put you up in some, gym in some working class neighborhood and kick all the students out of school. And, the city of Martha's Vineyard is still going to give you housing in some hotel somewhere. And, the state and local governments are still providing a lot of services. They provide education, they provide housing, they provide healthcare, they provide all these things for these flood of asylum seekers, and it puts big strains on their budget. So everyone is playing hot potato with these guys. Like, oh, I don't want these guys. You take them because it costs them local money, right? It's like Bitcoin mining, right? It's like, regardless of what you think of the economics of Bitcoin mining, whether that's valuable on a global level, certainly the places that have to support that with electrical infrastructure, who don't actually see the financial benefits of that get mad, right? It's like, oh, the Bitcoin miners came into town and they're using all our electricity. And, but they're taking the electricity, they're mining the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin doesn't stay here. They transfer it elsewhere. They just have the mining operation here, right? So it's just like they're using our electricity and now they're putting a strain on our infrastructure and we're not getting paid for this. And that's why local, Bitcoin has this problem with local governments, and strain on local infrastructure. So I think with illegal immigrants of the new type, the asylum seekers, that's the main cost is the strain on local fiscal stuff. Obviously, housing is also a strain, like where you're going to house the people. But that's like, that's not just fiscal because the government isn't the only one responsible for your housing. Illegal immigrants are going to be pretty poor people. They're not going to turf you out of your housing. They're not, but like it is going to put a strain, especially on the low end of the market, because you're going to have like giant multi-generation family of people who came in seeking asylum, all cramming into one tiny apartment and, whatever. So that's going to be a problem too. Like, where do you find the housing for these people? So it is a major, logistical and fiscal challenge here.
Got it. That's a good overview. Before we go, I want to make sure to also get into your recent piece on sort of a new paradigm of thinking about progressive economics and why it should be more supply focused than demand focused. Can you give more background on some of the substance underlying the demand focus idea, and then talk about why there should be a shift?
Right. So basically, I know all these people at these progressive think tanks, and they're generally, they're good people. Well, most of them. Basically, they developed a lot of their ideas about, so they have all these ideas about how to transform the economy. And a lot of these ideas were developed in the 2010s. And especially after the Great Recession, made it seem like neoliberal laissez-faire economics is dead. We need a replacement, right? And at that time, we had a lot of people out of work. We had a lot of idle capacity. We had this demand deficiency. Aggregate demand was low. It was a depression. We didn't call it a depression, but it was a depression that we were in the early 2010s. And we started really coming out of that around like 2013, maybe. And then by the late 2010s, we were entirely out of it. But it took us that long to actually recover. So for the early 2010s, when a lot of these ideas came around, there's a big lag between when people form their ideas and when the ideas get sold to politicians and as, like actionable things, right? There's a lag. So a lot of these people came up, a lot of these progressives came up with the idea that like, well, what we need is jobs, jobs, jobs. And jobs, jobs, jobs is also a traditional Democratic thing that Democrats love. The reason is the New Deal, because we had an even bigger depression in the 30s, and Democrats massively increased the size of the state in order to get us out. And it did work. It worked. But then, and they were, at the same time, they were able to accomplish a lot of their priorities, a lot of their other priorities. The New Deal funded the arts and gave more jobs and houses to Black people and, conserved nature more and did a lot of the stuff that progressives had wanted to do anyway. But it could do all that, and it could do all that because of it was providing jobs to the jobless. And, the jobless were like the massive army of people, right? We had this huge army of jobless people. And so they sort of wanted to repeat that trick. And in the early 2010s, we could have repeated that trick. We could have, to some degree, right? We could have gotten out of the Great Recession while providing a whole bunch of jobs with demand stimulus. And at the same time, advance some progressive policy priorities. But after the pandemic, that window really closed. And the reason is because of inflation. We shifted out of this, demand deficient paradigm into a demand saturated paradigm. And it's not clear whether we'll shift back, right? We could have another financial crisis, whatever. But with the, decoupling from China, I think that's gonna provide, like supply limitations that are gonna be chronic. Also, we've just limited our own supply via a thicket of fucking rules like NEPA and like a million other things. And we've shifted that over the years so that we, much more than like in the New Deal time, the government could just come in and say, hey, we're building a dam here, and then we build the dam. We'd say, hey, we're building a road here, and then we built the road. Now you have to go through NEPA, you have to go through all this stuff, all these massive thickets of regulation that we put up in the 70s as anti-growth regulation. And Matt Iglesias pointed this out when he was talking about progressive think tanks. He was saying anti-growth regulation is really that's really the enemy. Progressive industrial policy is actually a pro-growth program. And he got a little hung up on this one, sort of like web intern, I suppose, who put on the Hewlett Foundation that like neoliberalism believes in growth at all costs. Well, actually, I would say that the new progressive economic policy is more pro-growth than neoliberalism was, right? Neoliberalism was all about efficiency. Neoliberalism was a program of efficiency at all costs, not growth at all costs. The new progressive stuff is like, let's build more infrastructure, let's build more industry, let's build more stuff, right? And that is more about growth, even at the expense of some efficiency. And so I think that the person who wrote that web copy got that wrong, but Matt Iglesias fixated too much on that. But anyway, I guess back to the point, we are in this demand constrained environment where we can't build enough stuff, partly because of rules and partly because of, we need a bigger bureaucracy, partly because our financial system works different than it used to. There's all these reasons we can't build, and we need to do that. And progressive think tanks are pivoting toward that, right? Progressive think tanks have embraced the idea of state capacity, build a bigger bureaucracy, cut through red tape. Bureaucracy as a way to cut through red tape instead of bureaucracy as a generator of red tape. And that's called state capacity, right? They're on that. And, the supply side liberalism, which is like embraces deregulation as one part of supply in boosting supply, they're on that too. So their instincts are good, but they need they need to pivot more away from the idea of jobs as the central like appeal towards stuff. So less about jobs, more about stuff. And so you can see California high-speed rail. We started funding it in 2009. Still, there's zero functioning track. We've spent billions and billions of dollars on it. It's insanely over budget, insanely behind schedule, and the functioning section of track that will be functioning a few years from now is out in the middle of the Central Valley where nobody really needs that. Like it is away from the big population centers because they just couldn't do it there. And so it was a giant boondoggle, and yet you have the California High-Speed Rail Authority going on Twitter and boasting about creating all these good jobs. Look how many good jobs we've created. Like, buddy, that's not a win. That's a loss. You're doing the thing from the apocryphal Milton Friedman story where, like, he's like, why don't you create, if you want to just create more jobs, why don't you just have all the construction workers dig ditches with spoons? That's the story. It probably never happened, but that's what they're actually doing. They're like, look how many ditches we've dug with spoons. And like that really discredits progressivism in the eyes of the public. It's like you didn't provide the stuff, you just provided the jobs. So I want progressives to shift from jobs to stuff. And to their credit, they already have the idea of how to get them more stuff. State capacity is already in there. Supply side liberalism is already in there. This is not like some new thing they need to put in that they haven't put in yet, right? But it needs more emphasis, and the jobs need less emphasis. We're good on jobs, guys. We're good on that. Everybody has a job. Now what we need is stuff. Jobs need to be able to, you need to be able to use the money you get from your job to buy cheap energy, to buy a cheap house, to ride a cheap train, things like that. We need the stuff, guys. And so they're in the middle of that pivot, but I think that pivot needs to accelerate.
Are they receptive to it?
Some are, some aren't. So I think that, I think the people at the Roosevelt Institute, and especially the Hewlett Institute people, have been extremely receptive to this. The Roosevelt Institute people have been receptive to it. The Washington Center for Equitable Growth, I don't talk to anymore because they all work for the Biden administration and they're all in government now. But then I would say that those people are receptive to this idea, that you see the Hewlett people thinking a lot about this and in the middle of pivoting toward this. And you see them recognize that what a debacle it has been. The Roosevelt Institute has been slower to pivot. They have defended NEPA. The Roosevelt Institute sees themselves more as catering to like the groups, stakeholders, like basically lawyers who make their living suing people on NEPA, and like, rich NIMBYs who might give them money. Like, I think that the Roosevelt Institution is being pulled hard by those people to like not fight NEPA. But on the other hand, I think they've come up with some interesting stuff about like, well, how could we beef up the bureaucracy? Because it's like that's their alternative, and it happens to be a thing we need to do. So I see positive movement on that front. I think that the Hewlett Foundation has really platformed Jennifer Palka, the Code for America woman, who is all about state capacity. So that's really good. That's a very good sign. And so, even the guys at Employ America have done some work on like how we could more strategically use like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and things like that to boost supply of oil. And they're actually, pro oil supply. And they've done some work with the Institute for Progress people on permitting reform and stuff like that too. So you do see this pivot in action in various directions and various degrees among these think tanks. I just think like, yes, that's the direction you need to go. That's the important shift that needs to happen. I don't think that's necessarily news to these people, but I think it's good to encourage that in public and to say in public, this is the shift that needs to happen, and it can happen. And I think it will. We need to get out of the 2010s mindset. So you'll notice one recurring theme in a lot of what I say is that the 2010s are over. We need to get out of the 2010s, and, getting rid of like jobs is like the reason for existence for every progressive policy is part of getting out of the 2010s.
One more topic, we'll close on this, but it's your great post on China industrial policy. You basically have this notion of, hey, you've been advocating for industrial policy in the US, but mostly for national security reasons, not economics reasons, whereas China actually thinks about it in economic terms. Can you explain this and what you think about it?
I've been saying, look, if you're going to defend yourself against China, you need industrial policy. It's one thing you need. And none of the critics of industrial policy, none of the people at Cato or whoever, or the British writers at The Economist and the Financial Times, none of these people have an answer to this. Their answer, the harder you press them, the more they'll deflect to other stuff. And ultimately their answer will just be, oh no, just surrender to China and hope you can make a little money investing in them, which is bullshit. You won't. And so they have no answer to this argument. Industrial policy, the national security justification of industrial policy, which Jake Sullivan has said again and again in his speeches. And Janet Yellen has talked about it a bit too. And I think all the Biden administration people know that the national security is like reason enough to do industrial policy. But there's also the question of, can it help you economically? And I actually think there is a case for that too. I think that when you have new industries like AI, like electric cars and whatever, you actually can make your country richer by occupying an important position in that industry. So it's good to do industrial policy for new growing industries based on emergent technologies for purely economic reasons, even if you didn't need the military stuff, which you do. But there's also a bunch of people running around who are kind of like China boosters, and there's more and less smart versions of these. Like the smartest version of this is like probably Glenn Luke, who's an analyst who is just relentlessly pro everything China does and is like, China's government, you got it covered. But he's like, but he's a smart guy who knows a lot, very deeply understands the institutional details of Chinese industrial policy. And then there's less temperate, less measured guys, like the guys who write for Asia Times. There's like those guys are just like, China will crush you, everything they do is right, the Western economic paradigm is broken, you're just selling out to monopoly capitalists while China actually produces things for real people. And it's just, it's like come on guys, you would have said the same thing about the USSR. Now it's question, China's more skilled than the USSR at a lot of stuff, right? The question is whether they've found a whole new way to run an economy. And the basic idea here is that if you subsidize things, then you'll find good company. Good companies will pop out of the woodwork. And then you can just make all the other companies go bankrupt, and then you've created a good company. So it's like, imagine a VC, right? And the VC says, I would really like good ride-hailing companies to exist, okay? So I'm going to use my VC money, my easy VC money, because it's like the 2010s, right? I'm going to use my easy VC money at ZERP to just blast money to 20 different ride-hailing companies. And then you get one, Uber, that's good. And then now you have a ride-hailing company where you didn't before, and maybe you got a lot faster than you otherwise would have. And so this is basically a description of how Uber came about, right? And so now imagine just doing that for every industry. Say, okay, you know what? We want a really good electric car company, or we want 3 really good electric car companies. We don't have that now because nobody has good electric car companies because no freaking electric cars. America has 1, it's Tesla. China had 0. And they're like, okay, let's spend $250 billion on this. And so then they do spend $250 billion, and then everyone and their dog makes electric cars, and it leads to a huge sea of rotting junk cars, just, and then in the process, you find BYD. Now you've got a good electric car company, maybe Xiaomi too. Okay. And so now look, bam, now you have an electric car industry that's world beating. You got that. You spent a lot of money on it. Was it worth it? I don't know. Who's going to do the cost benefit on that? But I also don't know whether it was worth it to spend all those VC dollars to create Uber, right? Was value created? I don't know. But you did create a ride hailing industry that looks to be at least somewhat durable, if not quite as profitable as people initially hoped for. And so, yeah, so it's basically the VC strategy at the level of government. And I'm like, that might work. Just subsidizing stuff like isn't just for the sake of having more stuff is generally not a good idea, because subsidies cost money, and they cost resources. Like those, that's just central planning, and that's just like you're just being the Soviet Union then. If you think that like subsidies are good because you get more stuff, you're just being the USSR, and that's dumb. But if you think subsidies are good because they help you grow, identify the best companies and grow the best companies, and then after that you cut off the subsidy so that the shitty companies all die and aren't taking up extra resources, and you've still got the good company in perpetuity now, and the externality you're fixing is actually just the difficulty of starting a really good big company, right? There may be something to that. And certainly I think in new industries, where like the United States, didn't have good AI companies a few years ago. We had Google, but we didn't have OpenAI. We didn't have Anthropic. We didn't have that stuff. New industries, it may be worth it to spend a little money to incubate the new industries. Basically have the government act like a VC. $250 billion to make electric car companies? I don't know about that. But I don't know, China's still not that rich a country. And so maybe one of the reasons they're not rich is because they overspend on things like that. But you can't deny that BYD is great, really great company, has really pushed technology forward. Cattle is a great company. They're making electric airplanes now with some newfangled battery that we don't even know how it works. That's cool. And then, so I realized that Jordan Schneider of China Talk?
Yeah. I actually want to have him on at some point.
Yeah. And he always says, that's cool. And I've realized that I'm just imitating him when I say that. I'm just doing my Jordan Schneider impression. So we could get him on and we can just say, that's cool about everything.
And see if he notices where,
we should have him on. We should definitely have him on.
Yeah, he's great.
Anyway, so that's basically the idea. The idea is incubating new industries. Do you want to have the government act like a gigantic ass VC? Just splash some money out and see who wins. That's the question.
Makes sense. I want to be mindful of time. We're a bit over, but this was a great mailbag episode. And listeners, please keep submitting your questions. I didn't get to all of them this time because I just wanted to go into a couple of these great articles, but we'll do next time or in future episodes. Noah, as always, great chatting, and until next time.
Until next time.